Hello, greetings everyone. Welcome to Covenant Calendar Club. We're so glad that you're here, and we want to welcome you this evening. We pray that you'll be richly blessed from the study that you're about to receive, that your ears are open, eyes are wide open, and that you and yours are blessed. Everyone, let's give our YouTube viewers a big shout out and welcome them with a shout. Hello. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Baruch Hashem Yahuwah. Amen. So we're going to go ahead and turn the screen over to Charlene and Tim. We'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, are we all ready to go? I can't see anybody, so I have to hear you. Anyway, this is...
Yes.
Okay, it sounds really good. We're on part number 6 for the moon, oh the moon, and we will get started because everyone, we have exactly 100 slides tonight. Some of them will go quicker than others, but let's just get through this. I think this is the study that everybody's been waiting for. And of course the question always is, or the comment, everybody wants to know about that moon, oh the moon. And I know that was a question for Tim and myself as well. I'm calling part number 6, Yahuwah's month in non-Torah scriptures. These are the books after Deuteronomy all the way to the end of Malachi. And I have a question tonight. You know, we always have lots of questions. And if there's anything that I want you to remember or never forget is that the word number 2320 is connected to the Hebrew word Kodesh. So the question is, oh Kodesh, will the 2320 new moon verses align with Moses and Torah? That is what we want to know tonight. We have our little birdies back just for a little bit, just to kind of give us some information. And Tim will be helping me with these slides. And of course, you know, our one little birdie has graduated and he's supposed to know everything. So, hey, Mr. Graduate, I just heard some really interesting calendar news from our friends in France. Did you hear anything about that by any way?
Yes, I did too. I think we should share the news with everyone because it's really exciting. You know,
what
different
else?
cultures see different things in the calendar study than we do. Let's read about what they're doing with the new YouTube trailer for Covenant Calendar. In English, it reads like this.
Yes, and we just got this in the mail here about a week or, I don't know, a couple days ago. And the people in France that are doing the calendar studies are really excited. And they've put up a YouTube trailer. I haven't seen it yet. Maybe it's launched now. But I decided that I would put this up to let you know what they have done in French. They've translated it into English so that we can read it. And I think you might enjoy it because it's the way that they're seeing Covenant Calendar. Here's what it sounds like. Time. Most people overlook it. However, it is one of the first things Yahuwah established. All of his creation works with time, years and seasons, months and weeks and days. And it's even truer when it comes to humanity. The one who controls time controls the world. And we know when we read Isaiah 14, we can see that there. And Tim talked about that, I think, on our last lesson. It goes on to say, that's why through history, men wanted to redefine time according to their terms, being at the origin of many liturgical calendars, modifying the Sabbath and the holy convocations. That's what they did. They have counterfeited the prophecies, thus blurring the reading of the events of the end times, erasing the landmarks left by a creator full of love for his creation. I'm thinking, yes, that's exactly true. It's important to start asking the right questions, to review the basics and ignore religious traditions and pagan influences in order to reveal the divine covenant calendar. Some of these questions could be, how to synchronize on Yahweh's time? Should the stars, the sun, and the moon be taken into account in the formation of the covenant calendar? What events determines the beginning of the day? Are the months really based on lunar cycles? And what is the role of the vernal equinox? And do the constellations have something to teach us? Francis saying it's about time for the fiancée to be synchronized with her beloved. The fiancée must discover the true calendar of her Lord of Lords and King of Kings. So they're putting out this little trailer to encourage people to investigate Yahuwah's covenant calendar. And I just thought that was really interesting, the way that they expressed it. It was very, very good. So thank you, France. We really appreciate that. And yes, calendar is all about time, discerning time. Last week we talked about Matthew 23:13, about how the keys of the kingdom were taken away. This week I would like to just do a little bit with Luke 12:56. This is Yahushua speaking with some very strong language. He's saying, you hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky and of the earth. But how is it that you do not discern this time? And the time is talking about the times that they were living in, time of the calendar. Remember, he said, you know when it's going to be a south wind, it's going to be warm, and different things. He said, but you can't discern the time. Well, what about discerning the time? A question, who really took away the keys to Yahuwah's covenant calendar? We are not going to answer that question tonight, but we do want to consider the information in this PowerPoint tonight because it is going to give some answers about how these keys were removed. And in the next study, we're going to deal with that quite a bit deeper. Now, would you say Israel took away the keys? Was it somebody in Galilee or Samaria or Judah? Or was it the 1611 translators that took away the keys to understanding Yahuwah's covenant calendar? Or was it the Hebrew lexicon writers? Remember what we found from them last week? Who actually removed these keys? Or was it all of them? That's what we're looking for tonight. Now, keys are really important, and it's important to have secular historical quotes. And we're finding that these quotes are now being restored. 5 and 6 years ago, when we were really getting into the studies for covenant calendar, and that was just the day start, you couldn't find a historical quote on the internet if you tried. But they're everywhere now, and there's a lot of things coming out for the moon month now. So these secular historical quotes are very important, and they do assist us in understanding the truth as it is in Torah. But we need to be careful when we find historical quotes, because they have to align with Torah. That's why your study should be from Scripture first. Anyway, I want to give you 2 quotes tonight on moon worship. They're from 2 different sources, but they're almost identical. This first source, I have the page numbers, but I could not find the book. Whoever was writing the paper forgot to put the book down, and I was not able to track down the book, not yet. Anyway, it goes on to say, moon worship was dominant in the Mesopotamian world from which the patriarchs emerged around 1800 BC, and this is with Abraham. He was a key scripture figure. At that time, and in succeeding centuries, moon worship in Mesopotamia centered on a large pantheon of assorted gods whose images proliferated in the temples. Myths die hard, and the Bible is full of graphic detail showing how the ancient Hebrews slipped readily from time to time into celebrations that bore the mark of the original pagan practices. I want to read that again because this is exactly what we're going to break open in our next study. Myths die hard. The Bible is full of graphic detail showing how the ancient Hebrews slipped readily from time to time into celebrations that bore the mark of the original pagan practices. If you don't understand that today, you will understand it next week. But the quote goes on to say, many hitherto puzzling aspects of the Jewish tradition were illuminated in this process. A notable example is the way in which all festivals, including the Sabbath, start with moonrise on the night before. So they got trapped with these pagan ways. The reason is an echo of the way the Babylonians and the Assyrians assigned the respective roles of the two great luminaries. And they're saying this is the sun and the moon. Well, we know that the moon is not one of the great luminaries. We've already learned that. But I just want you to notice where the echoing is coming from Babylon and Assyria. It doesn't say anything about Egypt. So that's one quote, and if anybody can find the source, the actual book it was written in, please send it to me. But it's on pages 55, 57, and 58. This is the second quote. It's by W.F. Albright, and in his book, The Role of Canaanites in the History of Civilization, almost says the same thing, just a little bit different. Second quote on moon worship by W.F. Albright in his book, The Role of Canaanites in the History of Civilization, page 333. He says, Ur was a major center of moon god worship with a famous temple, the ruins of which are still visible today. Historical records do in fact indicate that in ancient times, the two major centers of the pagan moon god were at Haran and Ur of Chaldees. We're going to learn about this next time we study, right from the scriptures. Now look what he says. The family of Abraham, and I'm saying that is Terah, the father, originally worshipped the moon god in their pagan state before Elohim revealed himself to them. Now that might be a really strong statement, but we're going to find out next time, I think part number 7, how this is actually true. You'll find this in scriptures, and we're going to deal with it a lot. So moon worship did enter into the picture quite early on. Okay, we like to see those quotes, but what have we learned so far about these Hebrew word numbers 2320 and 2318? And I'm sure most of you remember that 2320 is Kodesh, and it is the noun form. And the primitive root for 2320 is 2318. It's Kadash, the verb form. So we always need a noun and a verb to work together. Just like we had for the word moon, we have Yarek and Yarak. We have the noun and the verb, and the same thing is happening here. And we did a lot of work from the Englishman's Concordance. Creation has a proper placement of definitions, and you've seen this chart before too. On the very first day of creation, we have the first day of the first week, and we have the first day of the first month, and also it would be the first day of the first year. So that very first day of creation right there would be the first day of the first month, and that is Okodesh. When you count 30 days and come to the end of your month, this is where you have the renewal on your second month, day number 1. That is Kadash. That is your renewal. So Kodesh is your noun. That's your creation month. And when it renews, it's your verb. But on day 4, we have the moon and the sun and the stars commissioned in the sky. 3394 is Yarak. This is where the moon starts its moon cycles. And you count 30 days at the beginning of creation, and on the first day of the second month for the moon, you have a rebuilding of the moon. That is Yarak, 3391. So for the moon month, because there is a moon month, remember it's for ordinances that bless the earth and mankind, here's your noun, there's your verb for rebuilding. And both of these new months renew and rebuild when their 30th day ends. So there's 2 of them, not just 1. And that's probably a big thing to remember. There are keys to understanding this Kodesh study, and I would just like to go over some of them, and hopefully you can remember. To properly understand the 2320 Kodesh definition, And we already did that last week in a very deep study, not last week, last session. We did a very deep study on 2320 Kodesh. We need to have discernment when lexicon definitions do not align with Torah, and we talked about that as well. We need to remember to give careful consideration of content and context with Torah. We will be looking at that today. And we need to plan to study the new moon scriptures in order of date. And that's what we'll be doing. We've got 20 scriptures to look at today. I'm putting them in order of date. I cannot emphasize enough that getting things in order usually is something that's going to break open your study so that you can see what's going on. So if you're doing a study and you have a lot of different time frames, put your scriptures in order of date. And any ancient and secular history has to align with Torah. So these are just a few keys to remember. Okay, so Vivian's going to help with this slide number 14. If she can just unmute her mic.
I did.
And I think everybody should remember this slide. We've had it. Okay, Vivian, I'm going to help you over here. I'm just going to let you get started and see what you can remember.
Okay, just a minute. 3394. That's just a minute. That's a verb. Oh, it's a noun. I can see it. It's a noun. And it's literally the moon. And then 3391, there's two listings, Yerach. Then I'm hoping that that really is a verb now. Yay! Woohoo! And then
Good.
3842 has three listings, Labana. And oh my gosh. That would be, that's also the light of the moon, like as it's the light, I think. I remember it's the light. The color, yes. Yeah, that's what I meant, color. It's coming, it's coming. And 7720, one listings, Shaharan. Now, that one is the shining.
Starts with an S.
Shining.
Starts with an S.
Oh, simile for comparison? Ah, okay. Well, I'm doing not so well here. So now, 2320, Hodesh, that is a noun. I know that one. Yay!
That's right. Now, I have a verb there because I didn't have room to put 2318. But Vivian, you did really good. And it's a little bit different when you're on the other side and having to teach, isn't it?
And all,
Vivian, can you tell me?
Yes.
Can you tell me for 3394, in the Strong's Concordance, it listed 26 listings. Do you remember how many listings were in the Englishman's Concordance?
I think 269.
No, that's for number 5. We're talking about 33. This is 26 listings for Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how many, anybody that remembers how many there was in the Englishman's Concordance?
Like 3 or 4.
No.
The
There
same
was
number?
exactly, yes, exactly 26.
Exactly the same
And they were
number.
exactly, yes. And so Vivian, just hang on in there with me. Out of these 26 listings, and they were exactly the same, was there any listings there that said this literal moon was in charge of the month?
None.
None. That's right. We looked at every verse, every content, every piece of context, and there wasn't anything. Okay, Vivian, for 3391, the Strongs had 2 listings. Do you remember how many were in the Englishman's Concordance? It's a double-digit number.
16.
That's close. It was 13. Very close. But in the Strongs, it had 2 listings that said moon. Do you remember what the other 11 listings said? It didn't say moon. Do you remember what it said?
Month.
That's right. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, for number 3, Labana, there were 3 listings in the Strongs. Do you remember how many were in the Englishman's Concordance?
15.
I think it was only 3. I think they were exactly the same. 3 listings, okay? But you were really enthusiastic about that. Okay, for Saharan, for the simile, there was only 1 listing in the Strongs. Do you remember how many in the Englishman's Concordance? It's a single-digit number.
I think also it was 1.
No, it was 3. There was 3.
Okay.
But the thing is, we found out when we looked at all these listings, not one of these verses had anything to say about the moon being in charge of the month, right?
Right. Yes.
Correct. Okay. We have 20 listings in the Strongs for moon. Does anybody remember how many in the Englishman's Concordance?
253.
Yeah. Was it 263 or 265? Anyway, quite a few.
Yes.
But out of all those listings, only 20 of them say moon. What did the other 260 or however many there were? No, weren't there 280? I think it was. I can't even remember right now. But all the other listings had which word?
Month.
Month, exactly.
Yes.
So the Englishman's Concordance had way more listings that said month. So now we are questioning why 20 of these are saying moon. Okay. Vivian, do you know the question there? Can you see the question?
Are there really 2 verbs and 2 nouns for 1 moon? Well, there appears to be, but somebody must have changed something. There's
Okay.
not
So
supposed to
where are the Okay. So which are the 2 verbs?
be-
Now one isn't up there, but one of them is.
That's the 2316. That's for the renewal. That's the verb.
Yeah, it's actually 2318. I should have it in here.
18.
But here's one right here. Yeah. 3391. There's a verb. And some are saying, well, this 2318 down here would be a verb too. So where's the 2 nouns? Which numbers have the 2 nouns?
Well, the 2320 and the 3394.
Yes. So if the 2320 right here, these 20 listings are being translated as moon, then that means that 2320 is being used as a noun for this moon here. And these are all moons as well. Well, maybe we should have done this review every single week. Thank you, Vivian.
Yes,
We're going to go ahead now.
Okay.
We're going to break open this question right here. That's the question we're going to break open tonight. So we're doing a review kind of what we've been learning in the past. I'd like you to have this for consideration. When the word Kodesh is translated as moon instead of month, it is a gross mistranslation. And Satan has used this gross error to mislead Judaism and Christianity with regards to the truth about Yahuwah's calendar and the beginning of his festal month. Satan has led people to wrongly focus on the various phases of the moon. Some of them do the conjunction, some do crescent, some are doing full moon now. And he's just led them all over the place, you know, like a ring in their nose with this moon stuff. So everywhere that they go, you know, following the moon instead of Yahuwah's months and his feast days. Because of wrong preconceived ideas based on an allegiance to false religion, physical and spiritual Jews today are using a calendar based on pagan premises. We're going to find out that the moon is completely based on paganism. As a result, people are trying to keep Yahuwah's feast days according to pagan reckoning, and that's exactly what Israel and Judah were doing in the Old Testament. By inserting the word moon for the translation of the word Kodesh, Satan has deviously focused the attention onto the moon to calculate the months. And our focus, what is the focus of calculating Yahuwah's months? What is it? Can somebody tell me? What do you have to do to find his months, or to figure out, you know, from one month to the next? What are we doing? Counting. That's right. As simple as that. Right. Counting 1 to 30. That's all you have to do. You don't have to look in the sky. So these points here are going to lend that the calendars that are out there are built on false premises. And I think you're going to see this more and more as we go through this moon study. Well, we've got 100 slides to go, so we're going to keep going. Last time, we looked very thoroughly at the definition for Kodesh, the 2320. And we found, we believe that it has to come into alignment with Moses and Torah as Yahuwah's new Kodesh month, not Yahuwah's new moon or man's agenda. Remember we did that? And we also took the lexicon challenges, and we did a very thorough examination of theologians of Hebrew lexicon study tools. We did 4 of them. We did Strong's, we did Brown Driver Briggs, we did Gesenius, and we looked at Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. Can anybody tell me what they remember when we looked at those 4 lexicon studies? What happened when we looked at the 2320? What did we find consistently?
Confusion.
It was defining
Confusion?
confusion, but the first thing that they were all pushing very hard was that 2320 Kodesh is the same as a new moon or the new moon month. Okay, so we did that the last time. Today we're going to look at some counsel from Moses to see what he's got to say. This is going to be from approximately 1450 BC. And I would like you to note that's over 2,500 years after creation. This is a long time after. And we want to know what his calendar instructions were to all the kings, the prophets, and the leaders, including Yahuwah's people today, because these Torah commands do not change. We are also going to look at all of the 20 new moon verses. They're all in non-Torah references. And how are these going to align with the Torah instructions? Okay, we've been learning all about how the day starts and how the month starts and how the year starts. So we should be able to figure this out. Moses does use the word moon in Torah. It's only there 4 times. 3394 is found 3 times in the Torah books. The very, very first time that you find the word moon is in Genesis 37:9. It's about Joseph having a dream. It says, and Joseph dreamed yet another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And we discovered that moon is used here as a prophetic sign. There's nothing there to tell us that the moon starts the month. And then the next 2 times there are 2 very strong warnings from Moses to not worship the moon or to look at it or serve it. I am going to read this tonight. We're only picking out the 2 verses. You should read the context before and after each of these verses. In Deuteronomy 4:19, and lest thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them. Remember we looked up those words, worship and serve? So it's like Moses said, don't do this. If you do this, you're going to get hooked. That's not a good thing. He repeats it somewhat in chapter 17, verse 3. It's talking about if there's anybody that has gone and served other gods and worshiped them, either the sun or the moon, it's 3394, or any of the host of heaven. That's planets, stars, comets, anything that's up there, which I have not commanded. There was a penalty for doing this. It was death by stoning.
Charlene?
So I don't think I would have done it. Yes.
Charlene? Yes, I'd just like to remind people that these are the two verses that are left out of these 613 statutes as recorded by Judaism. And the question is, why were these left out? Were they left out accidentally, or were they left out intentionally so they could continue on with serving the moon in their calendar?
Absolutely. And we're going to ask that same question at the end, but from another perspective. And what did we come up with? If you leave it out of the 613, then there is no way that anybody can judge you. And I've got some squigglies up on the screen. I have no idea where they're coming from because it's not for me. But anyway, 3391 is listed only one time in the Torah. It's in Deuteronomy 33:14, and this is the word number for the lunation cycle. And for the precious fruits brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon. And this is talking about the ordinances of the moon, the job description of the moon that it does for us up there with tides and different things we looked at a lot. So those are things that the moon does to bless the earth and mankind. And not one single time does Torah designate any phase of the moon to commence the month. This is a default law of Moses. It's just not there. So we're going to be defaulting back to Torah for this study today. Well, we have some counsel from Moses, again at 1450 BC. And for about 400 years after Moses, the people were led by prophets and judges. And Moses had given Yahuwah's inspired and explicit commands about the type of the year that his people were to live their lives by, because they needed to know how to come and worship him, of course on the weekly Sabbath, but on the annual Sabbaths and festivals as well. Now the prophets were to teach, and the judges counseled, and that was the way it was set up until the people clamored for a king, and then everything kind of went astray. Moses specifically gave instructions for all future kings, including worship statutes regarding Yahuwah's calendar, so there would be no mistake as to what was to happen when he wasn't there anymore. And the question is, did these instructions include the new moon as the marker for the new month? I think we already know the answer is no, but we're going to look deeper. Here's the Torah instructions for the leaders in Deuteronomy chapter 17. It's the same chapter that has the warning to not look to the sun, the moon, and the stars. And every king of Yahuwah's people, they were required to make a copy of the Torah. They had to read it and govern and judge by it, and they were not to depart from its words. So this is the part for the kings. These are instructions. Verse 14, when you come to the land which Yahuwah your Elohim is giving you, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you shall surely set a king over you, whom Yahuwah your Elohim chooses. Also it shall be, when he, the king, sits on the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write for himself a copy of this law in a book. And of course, they could get that law from the Levitical priests. And it, that law is Torah, shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yahuwah his Elohim, and be careful to observe all the words of this law and these statutes. Why? That he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, and that he may prolong his days in his kingdom. So these are the instructions. They're all pretty clear, and every king was to be governed by these Torah instructions. There are 20 non-Torah controversial verses. We're going to address all 20 of them. As I'm mentioning over and over again, they are non-Torah verses in the Old Testament books, and they seem to promote the new moon as the commencement of the biblical month and as being affiliated with the weekly Sabbath and the annual festivals. When we look at, I think, just about every one of these 20 verses, you will see this bundle of the new moon being connected to the weekly Sabbath and the annual festivals, that little special bundle. We're going to examine approximately 1,000 years of history for these non-Torah verses, and we're going to be looking at these verses through the leadership of 4 kings. That's going to be King Saul, King David, King Solomon, and King Hezekiah. We'll be looking at 5 prophets, Elisha, Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. And we are going to look at 3 prominent leaders, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, all very great men in our Old Testament books. And again, Moses gave these very specific instructions so that there would be no questions asked for every future king, prophet, and leader, so that they could know how to follow Yahuwah's calendar. But remember, Moses said, after I die, you're going to worship other gods, and that is strictly forbidden. So the question, did these leaders that we've just mentioned up here teach according to the laws of Moses or not? Got lots of questions. I just wanted to show you how these leaders and dates line up for our study tonight. We have King Saul first, and then King David, King Solomon, and then we will look at Elisha. This is an order of date. I'll have all the dates coming up on slides. Then we will look at Amos and Hosea, Isaiah, and King Hezekiah. Something very, very special happens with King Hezekiah. Around 700 BC is the sundial event. It was a miracle. Then we're going to go on and look at Ezekiel, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and that pretty much takes us through the whole non-Torah books. So, in this complete study, we will investigate these 12 great leaders around these 20 new moon verses. They appear to be new moon verses, to see if these leaders taught from Torah or if they were teaching from other books. And if they're teaching from other books, what are those other books? And another important question, in fact, this to me is the most important question, would or could these 12 great leaders all make the same mistake of teaching the new moon to begin the new month? That is a really important question. Could all 12 of them make the same mistake? And what would be the percentages of that? I don't know how you'd work that out. We're going to investigate what's true and what's false between 2320 Kodesh and 3394 Yarek. And another question that we've been asking right from the get-go is, why are 7% of the 2320 scriptures translated as new moons, which would have been number 3394, instead of new months, which is 2320 or Kodesh? Remember, out of the 280 some scriptures, only 20 have moon instead of month. It's only 7%. Why? Well, we have our birds back. Mr. Graduate, is there anything we need to know before we get started on our study today?
Yes, there is. All these dates are approximates. And do pay attention to the date of each verse and how many years have passed from the death of Moses. This is very, very important. Extremely.
Yes, decided to start putting things in order. So when we started doing our studies, we started in Genesis, then we went to Exodus. We started in order, and that is a secret, to do things in order. And when you get past Deuteronomy, then you need to get your verses in order of date, because the Bible, our King James Bible, is not chronologically in order. So let's get started. These are going to be slides for each of the 20 people. We'll have a slide like this with a table. We'll have our starting point here with Moses at 1450 BC. I will show you the verses that we're looking at. There'll be 20 of them. So for King Saul, which also includes a little bit of work with David and Jonathan, we're going to be looking at 3 scriptures from 1 Samuel, chapter 20. I'd also like you to note, from Moses to King Saul, this is around 390 years after Moses has died. You will see this number change on every one of these slides. So that'll just kind of help you keep track of the dates. We've got King Saul right here at 1062. Of course, this is all BC. I've put in here 721 Assyria, when Assyria scatters Israel. 701 is approximately when the sundial event happened. And 606, this is Babylon down here, when they marched Judah back to Babylon, just so that you have an idea of what's coming up. We'll do some preparation for 1 Samuel 20 first. Every king had to carefully study the law of Yahuwah. He had to make that his rule. He had to have a copy of the Torah in his own writing, and he was to read it all the days of his life, and he was to govern by it. So the following 3 scriptures in 1 Samuel are going to revolve around one event. I think you remember it. We did the study where David was expected to be present at the king's table, but he discovered that his life was in quite a bit of danger. He tells Jonathan that he's choosing not to attend for 3 days. He didn't want to get pinned to the wall. And if King Saul is actually leading according to Torah, would the first day of the new month be on the new moon day? That is our question here. These are the verses, and it does involve Jonathan and David. 1 Samuel 20, verse 5. And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon. That's what it says in the King James. Tomorrow is the new moon, but it is 2320 Kodesh. So I've got new month because that is what it should say. Behold, tomorrow is the new month, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat, but let me go, that I may hide myself in the field until the 3rd day at even. In verse 18, Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new month. It's 2320 Kodesh, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. But you can see the translators put in new moon. In verse 24, it says, So David hid himself in the field, and when the new month was come, the king sat down to eat meat. I have taken out moon because it was not 3994. It is the 2320 Kodesh. Now, this is not one of our scriptures, but I want to show you what happened here in 1 Samuel 20, 27, just 3 verses later. Look what happened. And it came to pass on the morrow, which was the 2nd day of the month. The translators put in month for 2320 Kodesh. They did not say it was the 2nd day of the new moon. I'd like you to notice that. You'll find these red flag verses. They goofed here. So our question is, according to Torah, in verses 5, 18, and 24, was it really the new moon or not on that first day when David was supposed to show up? And we've got the study, David's Kodesh Lechem, for a very thorough review. It's a very interesting study. Again, nowhere in Torah does Moses command the new moon to be observed. These verses should have read new month and not new moon. Let's go on to King David. This is approximately 1030 BC. This is now approximately 420 years after Moses. We're going to be looking at Psalms 81:3. I know you're all going to remember this particular verse when you see it. So we want to see if King David is going to be faithful to Torah commands. Now, another thing that's really interesting is that David is called a man of Yahuwah 3 times in the Old Testament, not just once, 3 times. Do you think that he would have written Psalms 81:3 this way if there is no Torah command? Psalm 81:3, it says, blow up the trumpet in the new moon, and the word number there is 2320 Kodesh, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day. And this is a very popular verse for feast keepers to use, say that absolutely the new moon is in charge of the month. This is one of those verses. But is there a Torah verse that gives clear instructions about this? We need to take this back to Torah. And we've already done this in a previous lesson. Remembering that both Moses and King David were men of Yahuwah, and remembering that King David followed the laws of Moses, we also have to believe that he would have honored Yahuwah's festal month according to the creation week, just as Moses recorded it. And the reason why? Because Numbers 10:10 says this, says blow the trumpet in the new month, and that is 2320 Kodesh. Blow the trumpet in the new month. King David would have written Psalms 81:3 like this, blow up the trumpet in the new month, in the time appointed on our solemn feast day, because it uses 2320 Kodesh. That aligns with Torah. Why? Because nowhere in Torah does Moses command the trumpet to be blown for the new moon. It's not there. We just have to take it back to Torah. We're learning to take everything back to Torah. Okay, let's go on to King Solomon. We're going to look at Numbers 5, 6, and 7 out of our 20 verses. They're all in Chronicles. King Solomon is approximately 1004 BC, and this is approximately 435 to 445 years. These verses are about 10 years apart, so we're inching up closer. Let's see about Solomon. There's some interesting things about him. We need to examine the practices of King Solomon just a little bit. And the question is, if the new moon declares the beginning of the festal month, would not Solomon, as the wisest man in the world, tell us about it? Surely he would know. He was declared the wisest man on the earth. He did not make provision during his 40 years as king for there ever to be a 13th month in any year. And that is exactly what happens approximately every 3rd year when following the moon. You have to make this adjustment. So it's time to take a serious look at this evidence of what in the world King Solomon was doing. We'll do a little bit of preparation for 1 Chronicles 23. What happens is King David, remember, a man of Yahuwah, he is giving instructions to King Solomon on building the temple. King David was not allowed to have the privilege to build the temple. It was given to his son Solomon. And he was also giving him the Levitical instructions for the sacrifices and the offerings according to Moses. In 1 Chronicles 22:5, David begins to make preparations for the building of the temple because he said Solomon was inexperienced. And then in verse 12, Solomon is commanded to observe the laws that Yahuwah gave to Moses, who was a man of Yahuwah as well. And in the very next verse, David actually repeats to Solomon to observe these laws that Yahuwah gave to Moses, so that it was very, very clear on what was to be done. King David also instructed King Solomon to follow the statutes and the commandments and the judgments, and that was all according to Moses, because where else do you go? He wanted him to know how to rule and reign according to Torah. And this was a reminder from King David in 1 Kings 2, 1 and 3. Now the days of David drew near that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, and keep the charge of Yahuwah your Elohim, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses. Everything is going back to Torah. So finally, Solomon is made king by David. How would the instructions in 1 Chronicles 23:31 read if you were using the term new months instead of new moon? Let's read it. And to offer all burnt sacrifices unto Yahuwah in the Sabbaths, in the new months, and that's 23:20 Kodesh, and on the set feasts by number according to the order commanded unto them, continually before Yahuwah. You see what's happening here? We have the Sabbaths. They've got new moons written in your King James, and you have the feast. This is a bundle of 3. One of these very, very famous verses. But we're already learning that nowhere in Torah does Moses give instructions for sacrifices on the new moons. It's just not there. So I want you to watch for these bundles of Sabbaths, new moons, and feasts. Solomon's kingdom was very well organized. He had chief fathers, captains of thousands and hundreds, and their officers that served the king in any matter of the courses, which came in and went out month by month. It's 23:20. Throughout all the months of the year of every course were 20 and 4,000. That is a quote from 1 Chronicles 27, where Solomon names 12 captains for each year. Did Moses make provision for a 13th month in any of the years? Because Solomon has named 12 captains. Well, let's take a look. I just gave you partly of what it reads in verse 1. It says the chief fathers and the captains of thousands and hundreds, their officers that served the king in any matter of the courses, which came in and went out month by month. It's 23:20. They didn't put in new moon to new moon. Throughout all the months of the year, every course, there were 24,000. And if you keep going through to verse 15, you see over the first course for the first month, he lists who it was, the second month, and the third month, all the way down 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 to the 12th month. All the captains are listed. There is no provision for a 13th month. This is impossible. If King Solomon was observing the calendar according to the moon month, he would have had to have captains for a 13th month somewhere along the line. And I just found this little flower. It's called Solomon's seal. I thought you'd be interested in that. It's just such a pretty little flower. Let's just keep going here. We're going to do some preparation for the 2 Chronicles chapter 2 scripture, because Solomon is now preparing to build the temple according to King David's instructions, and everything is set in place according to the ordinances given through the laws of Moses. And we know that both Moses and David are called men of Yahuwah several times in the scriptures. And King Solomon did carry out the plans for building the temple just as he was asked to do. He is going to follow David's words. King Solomon would have supported the new month as given in the Hebrew definitions. In 2 Chronicles 2:4, watch for the bundles here. It says, "Behold, I build a house to the name of Yahuwah my Elohim, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings morning and evening, on the Sabbaths, on the new moons or new months." It's 23:20, Kodesh. "And on the solemn feasts of Yahuwah our Elohim." This is an ordinance forever to Israel. So it's an ordinance forever. Is it going to be new moons, or is it going to be new months? The word number is 23:20. It is not 3994. I'm here to tell you Solomon did not honor any new moon because Hebrew does not use 3394 Yarek. Not once. We're still working on our preparation for 2 Chronicles 8. This is another verse. It's about 10 years later, and the word Kadesh. Again, Solomon is carrying out the plans of King David exactly as instructed according to the laws of Moses. He was pretty obedient in his early years of kingship. In 2 Chronicles 8:14, Solomon appointed, according to the order of David his father, and the Levites to their charges, to praise and minister before the priest as the duty of every day required, the porters also by their courses at every gate, for so had David the man of Yahuwah commanded. This is a workup verse for what we're going to look at next. In 2 Chronicles 8:15 it says, and they departed not from the commandment of the king unto the priests and the Levites concerning any matter or concerning the treasures. So Solomon was obviously reading Torah, and he was ruling according to it, and they didn't depart from the commandment of the king. Here's the verse that we want to consider, 2 Chronicles 8:13. Even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses, on the Sabbaths and on the, is it new moons or new months? Because the word number is 2320 Kodesh, and on the solemn feasts, 3 times in the year, even in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles. Now this is a really interesting verse because it's got all kinds of wording in here for worship statutes. We've got Sabbaths, new moons or new months, and we've got the solemn feast listed, and then it lists them again. So would it be new moons or new months with 2320 Kodesh being in there? And this event is 9 to 10 years after 1 Chronicles 23:31. And we know that Solomon is still following the Torah commands for offerings on the new month. So it would not have been a new moon. It would have been a new month. Yahuwah's festal month. Just count to 30. So thank you, King Solomon. Let's look at Elisha and the Shunammite woman. This is basically around 895 BC, and we are now about 555 years after Moses. Some interesting things here about Elisha and the Shunammite woman. Now Elisha was trained under Elijah, who was translated. We know that they were both very great men of Yahuwah. And I do not think that Elijah would have had calendar wrong, especially if he was translated. He most likely instructed Elisha very well. The Shunammite woman knew Elisha was a very great prophet, according to the testimony in 2 Kings 4:22. It says, and she called unto her husband and said, that I might run to Elisha, the man of Yahuwah. Notice that. He's a man of Yahuwah. And then it goes on to say, and he, the husband of the Shunammite woman, said, wherefore wilt thou go to Elisha today? It is neither, look here, it is neither the new moon, or is it new month? It is neither the new month nor the Sabbath. Again, the number is 2320 Kodesh. So we know that it has to be new month. And again, this is a time frame of 550 years after Moses. Hebrew is not using 3394 for moon. I think I said 3994 somewhere else along the way, so that needs to be corrected to 3394. Well, you can get mixed up with all these numbers. Now we're going to come across some very interesting verses, number 9, 10, 11, and 12 from Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah. These 4 verses need qualifiers to show us the context is talking about Yahuwah's people following the pagan moon festivals. We talked about qualifiers, and that when we have context in the scripture that is showing you that there's something going on with pagan worship, then we need to understand how to read these verses. This is what I call new moon apostasy, and we're looking for the qualifiers. When it says their months or her new months, we're actually a following after the pagan new moon months. And this was a replacement for Yahuwah's festal month. So let's break these verses open. They're very interesting. We'll do Amos first. This is around 787 BC, over 660 years after Moses. And this is where a great deal of apostasy begins to set in. A great deal of apostasy. We'll be doing more on that in our next study. Amos is actually the first one here that is dealing with apostate Israel. Well, who in the world was Amos? He was just a shepherd. He was from Judah, and he was a servant of Yahuwah. Yahuwah tells Amos that Israel will long for the new moons and the Sabbaths to be over with so that they can follow their pagan ways and their immorality. They were led away by false gods. You'll find that in chapter 2, verse 4, that most likely were honored on the day of the pagan new moon. 660 years after Moses, Amos is faced with Israel's apostasy of the pagan new moons, and what is he going to do about it? This new month that is qualified in the verse by those that are following the pagan ways is definitely referring to the pagan new moon month. Let's take a look at it. In Amos 8:5, the people were saying, when will the new moon month be gone? Actually, month I have added in there because it's 2320, but they were saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, when will the Sabbath be gone, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances of deceit. I want to have time to go through this account, this scripture, and find out what exactly is going on. I cannot believe it, that Israel is admitting to their apostasy. They were celebrating the 3394 new moon instead of the 2320 Kodesh festal new month. You can see that there we're in apostasy. Amos had to deal with it. Didn't get very far. Okay, let's look at Hosea, because he's dealing with Israel's apostasy as well. This is only about 2 years afterwards, 785. He's still in this apostasy problem. We're still about 665 years after Moses. And Israel is getting into such a deep amount of apostasy that it's not going to be very far along, and Assyria is going to scatter them. Only 2 years later, Hosea has to give a message. He counsels Israel. This is about 84 years before Hezekiah's sundial miracle. We're going to talk more about that in the next study. Hosea also has a warning about worship celebrations because there is such a huge problem with apostasy in Israel. And don't forget, Judah is not far behind. They're basically following in Israel's tracks. Here's the question. Will Yahuwah's people heed Hosea's warning about her new moons, which is the qualifier in this verse? Can we find the qualifier? Hosea 2:11. I, this is Yahuwah speaking, will also cause all her mirth or joy to cease. I will cause her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts to cease. This is what Yahuwah is saying. The word here is moons. The number is 2320 Kodesh. But do you see the bundle? It's her feast days, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and her solemn feasts. It's another bundle. There's the review verse. In Hosea 2:11, her new moons is in full opposition with the calendar laws of Moses, completely 100%. And I want to ask you, is this a gross mistranslation or not? And that is a tricky question. We can talk about it later. Let's look at Isaiah. This is verses 11 and 12 out of the 20. Two verses that are together in chapter 1. They're very easy to find. Chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. Isaiah is also dealing with Israel's apostasy in 760, about 25 years later. This is 690 years after Moses. And I'm just wondering if you can see on the table, how the apostasy is going and whatnot. We're going to be doing more tables next time where you will see what is happening the further they get away from Moses. So let's look at Isaiah. 25 years later. His record is very worthy of careful notice. I just want to give you a little bit of heads up. Only 25 years after the writings of Hosea, Isaiah is giving another warning about the apostasy of Israel before they were taken captivity by Assyria. That's about 40 years down the line. However, they kept running after the pagan ways of worship. They were ignoring the covenant commands of Yahuwah, including his 30-day festal month. There was a lot of things going wrong. As you will note on the next slide, verse 14 says very emphatically, your new moons, your appointed feasts, in comparison to Hosea's wording, which was her new moons and her Sabbaths and all of her solemn feasts. They didn't say my new moons or Yahuwah's new moons. It said hers or yours. That's something important to pick up on. These two verses in Isaiah 1 should have been translated as your new months. But even so, it really doesn't matter if the verse said new moons or new months. The point is that neither their moon or their month was sacred, and it did not belong to Yahuwah, for it was all reckoned according to paganism and to moon worship. This is the qualifier. It's all about pagan worship. Remember, we're looking for these qualifiers. Let's read these first two verses. Isaiah 1:13. Yahuwah is saying, bring no more vain oblations, bring no more incense. It's an abomination unto me. The new moons is what it says in your King James. And you'll note the number is 2320 Kodesh. It says the new moons and the Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies, I cannot away with. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. You see this bundle here? New moons, Sabbath, solemn meetings. Nice little bundle. And again, in verse 14, your new moons, your appointed feasts, my soul hates. They are a trouble unto me, and I am weary to bear them. I would just like you to also note that these verses that we're reading from Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah, these are verses that people that do not agree with the feasts and festivals, they believe they've been nailed to the cross, they use these four verses to show you that the feasts and festivals were not good laws. They were not good laws to be kept, but they don't understand what is happening here for these verses for content and context. Verse 14 is quite an incredible verse. Your new moons, when it has the word 2320, and your appointed feasts, my soul hates. They are a trouble unto me.
Charlene?
Why? Because they were not Yahuwah's new months. They were not Yahuwah's appointed feasts. Yes.
Charlene, I find these verses are just dripping with irony because we hold that Chodesh is supposed to be a new month, and yet Yahuwah has allowed these to be translated as new moons, and they're written so specifically because new moons is the exact problem, and it's written in clear English. And I don't know if he has councils up there, but I can see him walking back and forth in his council, speaking to the people or speaking to his members, saying, it's spelled out so clear in their own language in front of their faces. What more do I have to do to get these people to understand the mistranslation and the problem, the contamination that is in the scriptures? It's so ironic. It identifies the problem written out in words that we can see and understand. And yet for years we have missed this. It's so ironic. It just blows me away every time I read these texts.
Yes. And I would like someone, if we have time for some discussion afterwards, to hear some comments from our panel tonight, because these verses from Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah are, really deep. There's lots of study that could go into this. But to this verse is incredible, because yes, if anything, it is true. It was the new pagan month. That's what it was. It was a 2310 Kodesh, but it was a pagan month. Not that it was a holy month, not by any means, or a holy festal month, nothing like that. But this was all according to pagan calculation and pagan festivals. That's your qualifier here. So the question, is it not interesting that the real problem of calculating the pagan months in these verses is actually called new moons in Isaiah 1:14 when they're using 2320 Kodesh? Remember those definitions in 2320 when we looked it up in the Hebrew lexicons? It said a new moon. That was the first thing it said after it told us to look at 2318. Then it said the new moon, or whatever it was, a new moon. Did the King James translators know that it was the apostate appointed feasts that were fixed to the new moons? Do you think they knew that? But we know this. Yahuwah's appointed times were never fixed to the new moons. Not ever. Because the pagans were looking to the moon for their pagan feast calculations, they were on a different month, not creation's festal month. Yahuwah's people were following this pagan style of reckoning the month according to the moon phases in the Isaiah scriptures. And guess what? There are many today who are still holding tenaciously to this teaching. They will not let go. It's hard enough to teach them the dawn day, but when you talk to them about the moon, they get really upset. So you have to know how to share this. So here's a review. Which came first? Yahuwah's creation festal month or Yahuwah's moon month? Because he has two different kinds of months. Which came first? You better all get this answer right. We're going to review it one more time. We have the rebuilding, which is 2318 Kadash, and that's how the new month gets rebuilt, is through 2318. The month is 2320 Kodesh. I'm just going to put it up here so that you can see it. There's Kodesh. Here's the renewal, 30 days later, Kadash. There's your noun. Kodesh is your noun. Kadash is your verb. But here's the moon. There's a moon month. It's Yarek, 3394, and it rebuilds after counting 30 days. This is back before Hezekiah's sundial, not now. And there's your noun for your moon, 3394, Yarek, and Yarak is your verb, rebuilding. Yahuwah's new festal month still renews and it still rebuilds when the 30th day ends. But remember, we said that the moon cycle is really 27.3 days, and it's been stretched to 29.5 to get it as close to 30 days as possible. The moon does not have a lunation cycle of 30 days anymore. The Hebrew uses 2320 Kodesh for month. It does not use 3394 Yarek for moon. So, did the translators give Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah the best translation or not? And we're going to see about that in the next study. I wanted to have it today, but it was just going to get too long. Okay, it's time to look at King Hezekiah for just a little bit. We're doing number 13 out of 20 verses. It's only one verse in 2 Chronicles 31:3. We are approximately at 726 right now, and there's about 725 years after Moses. Good King Hezekiah comes along, thankfully for him. He's into reformation and restorations. And remember, he knew that all kings and leaders were responsible to know Torah. He knew they were to teach it, and he knew that they were to have their own written copy. And I'm pretty sure that King Hezekiah observed the 30-day month like this. Count 1 to 30, and then you start all over. It's a repetitive occurrence. In 726 BC, or approximately, Hezekiah invited Israel and Judah to celebrate the Passover in the second month. And the reason why is because the priests were not sanctified for the first month. I want you to note this blue box here. When you come into covenant, it is going to yield reformation and restoration. You will find this many times in the Old Testament, where when they came back into covenant with keeping the festivals especially, there was always huge reformation and restoration. This is what was happening with King Hezekiah. It was huge. He went in and destroyed all of the heathen altars in Jerusalem, just started to clean house. They even had a second Passover. It was a grand reformation and restoration. And you know what else? The people were happy. They were just so happy about it when they came back to being restored and reformed. You know, there was a massive campaign against all idol worship. Hezekiah absolutely followed the Torah guidelines for celebrations of Sabbath, appointed times, and new months. This is that bundle. He would have had it right. If not, there would have not have been reformation and restoration as recorded. In 2 Chronicles 31:3, this is the verse that we're looking at tonight. King Hezekiah appointed also the king's portion of his substance for the burnt offerings, to wit, for the morning and the evening burnt offerings, and the burnt offerings, here we go with this bundle, the burnt offerings for the Sabbaths, and for the new moons or new months, because it says 23:20. The burnt offerings for the Sabbaths, the new months, and for the set feasts, as it is written in the law of Yahuwah. Remember, 23:20 should be translated as new months. If there's nothing else you remember tonight, I want you to remember that. We're saying it enough time. Yahuwah's king would not have been following the pagan new moon. That is an absolute no-no. He would not have been doing it. Hezekiah absolutely followed Torah guidelines for celebrations of Sabbaths, appointed times, and Yahuwah's new months. I'm not sure who wrote Chronicles. I tried to find it today, and there's some feeling that maybe Ezra wrote the book of Chronicles. I'm not sure, it's kind of up in the air, but whoever wrote Chronicles would not have put new moons, especially with 23:20 Chodesh being the Hebrew word number. King Hezekiah and his sundial event happens right here, approximately 701. Assyria has already come in 720, about 20 years before, and they scattered Israel. I just want to point out that this is where Hezekiah's sundial event happened. This was an event that changed a lot of things. We are about 750 years after Moses, and there is a lot of apostasy going on. It is a sundial miracle worth looking at. It is extremely important. We will go into more detail in our next study. But there is no other Bible testimony that is recorded 3 times that I have found. And when it's recorded more than twice, I think it's time to listen up. I'm going to read these verses about Hezekiah. 2 Chronicles 32:24. In the days of Hezekiah, he was sick to death, and he prayed unto Yahuwah, and he gave him a sign. That's one verse. The second testimony is in 2 Kings 20, verses 9 to 11. Shall the shadow go forth 10 degrees, or go back 10 degrees? And Hezekiah must have thought about that first, and then he answered, it is a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. Nay, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. And Yahuwah brought the shadow 10 degrees backwards. We're going to do more on that later on too. Isaiah 38, 7 and 8, it says, and this shall be a sign unto thee. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, 10 degrees backwards. These are 3 verses that talk about this sundial miracle. It is very important, and we will study it in a future lesson. I wanted you to see those verses tonight. Well, let's look at number 14 out of 20. This is about Isaiah and the holy city. It isn't anything about apostasy with Israel or Judah. He's talking about the holy city. We're going to combine it with Isaiah 60, verse 20 tonight. Tim's going to help me teach some of these slides here. We already did Isaiah 60:20 when we did 33:94, I think one of our very first lessons. The date of this prophecy is about 3 years after the sundial event. It's very, very close to the sundial event. So here's the sundial event right here at 7:01, and Isaiah here is at 698 approximately, just shortly after, about 750 years after Moses. Have you heard this? The moon will not withdraw itself. I'm pretty sure you have. What does Isaiah 60:20 mean when it says the moon will not withdraw itself? Have you ever thought about that? Isaiah will be addressing a prophecy. He's not going to address events connected to the apostasy of Judah. We are already past Israel. Israel is scattered, so anything from now on would just concern Judah. But he's not addressing Judah. So the question is, will there be a time that the moon, as we see it, will eventually never withdraw itself? Or is there another concept? And we will consider 2 options tonight. Option number 1, the verse under consideration is Isaiah 66:23. It does use the word number 2320, Kodesh, and that needs to be addressed along with Isaiah 60:20. We need to compare these 2 verses. And number 2, we're going to review Isaiah 60:20. It's a prophetic reference to 3391, Yarak, or the lunation cycle and phases of the moon. So one is using, Isaiah 66:23 is using 2320 Kodesh, and Isaiah 60:20 is using 3391 Yarak. This is the moon's lunation cycle. This is what Isaiah 60:20 reads. The sun shall no more go down, neither shall thy moon withdraw itself. This is the lunation cycle. The lunation cycle decreases and increases every cycle of the moon. For Yahuwah shall be thine everlasting light. The context of the verse here is that Yahuwah's people are in his glory, if you read the verses around it. Could the phrase, the moon will no longer withdraw itself, mean that the moon is no longer changing the 3391 phases, the lunation phases? And if there is no withdrawing process, doesn't that mean that there will be no changing phases of the moon? And if that's the case, this would make it very difficult to observe any worship statutes with Yahuwah in heaven or the holy city from one new moon to another new moon, like we're going to find in Isaiah 66:23. Therefore, any understanding of a new moon in this context would be an impossibility. It just won't work. So we seem to have some conflict here. Tim, would you come in and help me teach these next slides from 71 to 73?
Sure. It says here, what does Isaiah 60:20 have to do with Isaiah 66:23? I'm going to read verse 20 in chapter 60. Thy sun shall no more go down, neither shall thy moon withdraw itself, for Yahuwah shall be thine everlasting light. H20 or H622, a kaf, a primitive root, to gather for any purpose, hence to receive, take away, i.e. remove, destroy, leave behind, put up, or restore. Isaiah 66:23, and it shall come to pass that from one new moon, that's Chodesh, to another, H23:20, Chodesh, and from one Sabbath to another shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith Yahuwah. So how is it that if this moon does not withdraw itself in the earth made new, and which where there will not be phases of the moon, and there will be no new moon to look at, because it will not withdraw itself. And the only way that you can have a new moon is if it's withdrawn, removes itself, and then produces itself new. But Isaiah said there will not be a new moon. How is it that just a few chapters later, Isaiah tells us that we will be worshiping from new moon to new moon? And here we read, how does Isaiah 60:20 and Isaiah 60:23 link to James 1:17? So what does James 1:17 say? Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. This shadow of turning is an incredibly important phrase. The word shadow is G5157, and the word is trope, from an apparently primary trepo, to turn, or a turn. Trope, a revolution, figuratively variation. KJV says turning. Now, turning is from G644, epos chiasma, from a compound of G575 and a derivative of G4639, a shading of, obscuration or darkening, a shadow. If we go back and search carefully, this word trope means as a direct reference to the heavenly celestial event of the Tekufa. That is, once again, where we're looking for the shadow. When this shadow goes a direct straight line across the ground, when you have markers and it does not turn, that is a direct reference to the shadow, or direct reference to the Tekufa. And here we see that Yaakov, which is the proper name for James, many years after Yahusha was gone, Yaakov is identifying solidly the Tekufa and the type of year that Yahusha lived, and that is still was still in the usage and still being taught long after Yahusha was gone. This neither shadow of turning is the covenant calendar year, and Yaakov confirms this once again by the Tekufa.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go back to Isaiah, it confirms. It confirms in Isaiah 66:23 when he says, we'll be worshiping from new month to new month, and that new moon should not be in there. Go ahead, Charlene.
You can finish the slide. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the last one in this section.
Okay, Isaiah 66:23, worship in the holy city. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon, only it should be should be new month, because the word is chodesh, to another. And from one Sabbath to another shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith Yahuwah. Did not Isaiah 60:20 just inform us that the new moon will no longer withdraw itself, indicating the strong possibility of completely eliminating the phases of the moon forever? How can Isaiah first tell us the moon will no longer go through the phases of being renewed, and then 6 chapters later tell us we will be worshiping according to the new moon? Is this not a direct contradiction? Is there a problem here somewhere? And where is the problem? Is it with the moon no longer withdrawing, or is it with the translation of the word Chodesh, which we see as new moon? Is that correct, or has there been a contamination in translation?
Yes, Tim, and this is one of those verses where I've heard it said that, you know, the month begins with the new moon, because here's the verse with Isaiah talking about worship in the holy city, and it says that we're going to have new moons up there, and they have failed to look at the definitions of 2320. You're absolutely right. This should not be translated as new moon. It should say from one new month to another, and this another is also 2320, so it would read new month to another new month, and from one Sabbath to another. So you have a bundle here as well. Very interesting. Well, you know what? All the problems are absolutely eliminated when we realize that we are not to be following any phase of the moon in the first place. We just don't need to do it. You can ditch it. This also means the moon should not receive any sacred regard to appoint worship statutes. It's just not even in the picture. Now, there's a review here. We've had this verse before from Jeremiah. He's telling us about the consequences for Judah turning away from Torah commands. And we know that Judah was worse than Israel in many ways. And this is what it says. We've had this verse before, Jeremiah 8, verse 2. And Babylon shall spread them, this is Judah, before the sun and the moon and all the host of the heavens, which they have loved, this is Judah, which Judah has loved, and which Judah has served, and after which Judah has walked, and which Judah has sought, and to which Judah has bowed themselves. They shall not be gathered nor buried, they shall be for dung on the face of the earth. It's a very strong command. Judah wants to worship the pagan gods and the sun, the moon, and the stars. They can have it. Yahuwah said, that's not what I asked you to do. In Isaiah 1, verses 4 and 5, and verses 10 to 17, you will find documentation for the traditions that insidiously infiltrated and contaminated the worship services of the Hebrew nation, and paying allegiance to the moon as the marker for the feasts and festivals is the top alarm of the list. We're going to go into this in great detail as well. There are many other prophets that sounded the same message. They just wouldn't listen. Okay, let's go on to Ezekiel. There's a bundle here of 4 scriptures, number 15, 16, 17, and 18 out of our 20. They're all from the book of Ezekiel. Our time frame is 574 BC. We are now about 875 years after Moses. And this is while Ezekiel is a captive in Babylon, 574. He was in Babylon and he was writing to the people of this temple that he wanted them to be prepared to build when they were released and went back to Jerusalem and to Judah. Ezekiel was a Levite, he was a prophet, and he was a priest of Torah. He had excellent qualifications. He had the authority to teach the covenant instructions correctly. And remember, Daniel was in the court of the king. Ezekiel was outside the court. He was outside living in Babylon with the people, and Jeremiah was back in Jerusalem, and they were dragging him all over the place. But Ezekiel was actually in Babylon with the people. He was there to teach. He was there to teach the strict laws of the Torah for the observance of the feasts, the Sabbaths, and the new month requirements. But don't forget, they're in Babylon, who is worshiping on a sunset day. They're doing a moon month, and they're worshiping all kinds of pagan gods. But his instructions in the following passages were for services that were to be conducted at the new temple at Jerusalem, and that would be after they returned from Babylon. However, that temple was never built. We know about that. These following passages are well after Hezekiah's sundial miracle, and it's about 38 years before the first exiles returned to Jerusalem. Ezekiel, will his prophecy follow the Torah? Would Ezekiel's prophecy follow the words of the 1611 translation for the Hebrew term of Kodesh, 2320, for the new temple? Let's look at these verses. In 45:17 it says, "And it shall be the prince's part to give offerings in the feasts, in the new moons," there's your bundle, "and in the Sabbaths." But the number is 2320, Kodesh. Ezekiel 46:1, "Thus saith Yahuwah, on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon." Another bundle here, Sabbath and new moon, but it's 2320. Verse 3, "Likewise the people of the land shall worship before Yahuwah in the Sabbaths and in the new moons," is what it's saying. There's your bundle. And verse 6, "And in the day of the new moon." I haven't given the whole verse because I didn't have room. But in all of these scriptures, moon is always put in here by the translators when the word is Kodesh. Ezekiel's temple was never built to provide a witness for a new moon day, so we can't do anything about that. But he talks about something happening here with the new 2320. Did you notice that the King James 1611 translation does not give recognition to Yahuwah's new festal month? They automatically put moon in here. We were probably infected by the Jewish people and what they were believing. I do not believe Ezekiel would have written new moons in his book because he was a prophet, a priest, and a teacher with excellent credentials. Okay, let's look at our last three great men, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. They did a wonderful work. They were great reformers. And before we examine the last two controversial scriptures, we need to do a review on some of the history around these men who led exiles back from Babylon. The timeline for these three men is from approximately 538, when the people were released from Babylon, to about 444 BC. The first return was under Zerubbabel. This was around 538, and he took the first batch back to Jerusalem. In between Zerubbabel and Ezra, you have the book of Esther and those events. We aren't going to go into that today, but just to give you an idea of where Esther would come in. The second return under Ezra was approximately 458, about 80 years after Zerubbabel. And the third return under Nehemiah and the rebuilding of the walls was approximately 445 to 444 BC. Basically, three wonderful men. Here's our timeline. We have Zerubbabel here at 536 and Ezra approximately 458, about 80 years later. This is now over 900 years, almost 1,000 years after Moses, for Zerubbabel and Ezra.
Didn't Abby go because I thought you wanted to play Minecraft today, and I went back home to play Minecraft. I was trying to let you do what you wanted to do today too.
Okay, we'll just continue on here. We've got a couple of more slides to go. So Zerubbabel, he has the first return of the Babylonian exiles coming back. In chapters 1 to 6 of Ezra, he records this history of Zerubbabel 80 years before Ezra arrives with the second group of exiles. And Ezra tells us how the law of Moses is still first priority almost 1,000 years later. These men are still using Torah. They are still basing everything on the books of Moses. It says in Ezra 3:2, then stood up Jeshua and his brethren, the priests, and Zerubbabel, and they builded the altar of Yahuwah of Israel to offer burnt offerings thereon, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of Yahuwah. So almost 1,000 years later, they are still going back to Torah. Very important verse. We already know that Moses did not command any offerings on a new moon because there's no verses in Torah, but only on the new month, which is Kodesh 2320. Now, I'd like you to notice the following scripture. In Ezra 3:5, and afterward he offered the continual burnt offering, both of the new moons or new month, and of all the set feasts of Yahuwah that were consecrated, and of everyone that willingly offered a free will offering unto Yahuwah. So you already know what I'm going to tell you. The translators put in new moons, but the word for moons, the word number is 2320. It should be new month. So, and afterward offered the continual burnt offering, both of the new month and of all the set feasts. You have this bundle in here again. Is it possible that Ezra would have written verse 5 with new moons? No, it is not even possible. Ezra recorded exactly what Zerubbabel did because he said, as it is written in the law of Moses. Very important. I like this study around Ezra. It's just really, really interesting. The Ezra 3:5 burnt offerings did not align with the pagan new moon. There is no way, no how. They are just coming back from being in exile for being in apostasy for so long. They're not going to come back offering things on the new moon. That's one of the reasons they went to Babylon in the first place. If the first exiles were following the pagan new moons, would Ezra not have recorded the event as your new moons or her new moons? Don't you think he would have said that? Just like Isaiah and Hosea did? Remember Hosea 2:11 in 785 and Isaiah in 760. They had the exact same thing written for the apostasy, documented 300 years earlier. So if Judah was actually using new moon worship again, I'm pretty sure Ezra would have written your new moons or her new moons. The King James 1611 translators did not give recognition to Yahuwah's Kodesh new festal month. They didn't do it. What happened? Well, Ezra brings back the second return of the exiles, and this is about 80 years after Zerubbabel brought back the first batch. And the question is, who was Ezra? I found this very interesting. He was an Aaronic priest, he was a skilled scribe, and he was a teacher of the law of Moses. And I've given you some references there. You can look them up. Between the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, Ezra is called a priest 8 times, and he's called a skilled scribe 7 times. And this confirms his very well qualified credentials. He was just not an ordinary person on the block. Yahuwah made sure that Ezra's credentials were the best because they needed to have another reformation and a restoration in Judah. And remembering, they're just coming back from Babylon. They've been in pagan Babylon for 70 years. They need to get back on track. Ezra has a commitment because he's a strong leader. It tells us in Ezra 7:10 for Ezra, and you can go look up where the verses where it says he's a skilled scribe and an Aaronic priest. For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of Yahuwah and to do it and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. And don't forget, the date here is about 458 BC. This is Ezra. He is still following Yahuwah. According to what? Laws of Moses. He is teaching the statutes and the ordinances to Israel, along with Nehemiah and the Levites, according to Yahuwah's everlasting covenant. He was a contemporary with Nehemiah there for a little bit. In fact, Ezra would never have written anything about new moons, and he wouldn't have taught the people such things. He was following the laws of Moses. So I want you to take very careful note of the next set of scriptures. Nehemiah 8:1. These are Torah instructions with Ezra. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate. And they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses. And Ezra the priest brought the book before the congregation, both of men and women, and all that could hear with understanding upon the first day of the 7th month. That would be trumpets. And Ezra read therein before the street, from the morning until midday, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law. And Nehemiah and Ezra the priest the scribe and the Levites that taught the people said unto all the people, This day is holy unto Yahuwah your Elohim. Mourn not, nor weep, for all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. This is just a few of the choice verses. There's many of them of what Ezra and Nehemiah were doing. It was a time of reformation and restoration, at least for a little while. So who earns your trust? Is it Ezra or is it the 1611 translators? We have to recognize that Yahuwah was watching over his leaders, that were watching over his people, especially through his prophets. And I'm talking about Amos, Hosea, Hezekiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Ezra, and Nehemiah. Yahuwah was watching over them. Ezra and others, like priests and scribes and kings and prophets, were instructed and they were accountable to teach Torah truths. That was their mandate. Therefore, their actions and their instructions have to default back to teaching the Creator's festal 30-day month. This is for Yahuwah's calendar, according to accurate and proper definitions for 2320 Kodesh. They would not have been using the definition that Strong's has given to us. We did that last time. Or do you think it's more likely the translators that were influenced by Jewish tradition? This is only 100 years, about 100, not even 100 years after Martin Luther, when they were doing their 1611 translation. Do you think that it's likely the translators interpreted 2320 Kodesh incorrectly, using the inaccurate words of new moons rather than new months? What do you think? What is it starting to look like? Okay, we have one more verse to go through. It's from Nehemiah. It's Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 33. We've come all the way down from Moses. We are at about 445 BC. This is over 1,000 years after Moses. We want to find out what's going on with Nehemiah as he brings back the third return of the exiles back to Jerusalem. And this is about 12 years or 13 years, something like that, after Ezra had returned with the second set of exiles. So these two men are kind of working close together. Remember that Nehemiah was the cupbearer there for the Persians, Medes and the Persians, so he had to get permission to do this little duty. Under Nehemiah, the people had confessed and repented for their sins with the pagan nations. You can find that in Nehemiah chapter 9. And the people actually agreed that they were going to separate themselves from the heathen people. They had got into some apostasy after coming back from with Zerubbabel the first time in 538, like 100 years before. They had gotten into some trouble. So they're saying, you know what, we're going to repent of our sins and we're going to separate ourselves from heathen people. We don't want to be doing that stuff anymore. They decided that they would support a temple tax that would supply the needed funds for the necessary supplies that were needed for the Sabbaths, the set feasts, and the new month celebrations. You see that bundle right there? They said that they would do it. So the date of this event is around 434 BC. It's this particular section is now his second return back to Jerusalem, about 11 or 12 years later. And guess what? He found the people had fallen back into their evil ways, and they were even conducting business on Sabbath after they had just said that they weren't going to do it. Within 11 to 12 years, they were back in the same rut. In fact, non-Jews were being permitted to conduct business inside Jerusalem on the Sabbath and to keep rooms in the temple. That's kind of an interesting topic. And he was pretty upset. But as governor, he decided he was going to purify the temple. So what did Nehemiah do? He led out in another campaign for reformation and restoration. He's on the track again. He's trying to get these people to come back to what they promised. He instructed the Levitical priests to implement the observance of what? The laws of Moses. That's kind of interesting. Well, is there any proof? Let's take a look. Nehemiah was so faithful. His efforts are a final witness in the Old Testament for observing the covenant worship statutes. It tells us in Nehemiah 10:33, this is our 20th verse, for the showbread and for the continual meat offering and for the continual burnt offering of the Sabbaths of the new months. I do not believe Nehemiah would have put moons in here. It's 2320 Kodesh. For the Sabbaths, the new months, for the set feasts, and for the holy things, and for the sin offerings, to make an atonement for Israel and for all the work of the house of our Elohim. 2320 Kodesh must be translated as new months and not new moons, as the King James has it. And a reminder, again, Moses' laws do not say anything about observing the new moon. He never ever uses 3394, I believe it is. I think that's a mistake there. I think it's 3394. Moses never says that you observe the new moon for the new month. So Nehemiah taught the people the same laws as Ezra did and all the others that were before him. This was another reminder so the people would not repeat their backsliding patterns. But how long did it last? That is the question. We aren't going to go into that tonight. We'll do that next time. For 1,000 years, not one of these great men of Yahuwah made one single mistake in teaching covenant calendar. I don't believe it. All of them followed Yahuwah's laws as given to Moses because there are no new moon worship statutes in Torah, period. All of these great men beckoned the people to forsake their pagan ways. Every one of them. Yes, some of the kings made their mistakes, but they always counseled and taught according to the laws of Moses. We're going to go back to our slide that has our conclusion on it here, answering our original question. Are there really two verbs and two nouns for one moon? And the answer is absolutely no. Neither 2320 Kodesh or 2318 Kadash, the noun and the verb, align with any moon month. Unless there's a qualifier in there that tells you that they're following pagan ways. You have to find that qualifier. So what in the world happened with these 20 verses? How did new moon words find their way into these 20 non-Torah scriptures through the use of 2320, and most of them have this bundle of Sabbath and new moon and feasts? How did this ever happen? Well, there are some things that could have happened with the 1611 King James translation to cause such a problem in only 7% of the scriptures that would establish the new moon over the new Kodesh month. Only 7%. There's two possibilities that I want you to consider. We will break this open next time. It's either this one. The translators ignorantly made a mistake by following the Jewish traditions of their new moon, or it's this one. The translators deliberately erred, causing allegiance and sacred regard to be given to the moon in place of Yahuwah's festal month start. It's either number 1 or it's number 2. They either did it ignorantly or they did it deliberately. We're going to find out in our next study lesson just exactly what happened. But let's go back to our original question. Who really took away the keys to Yahuwah's covenant calendar? Was it only the 1611 translators? Was it the Hebrew lexicon writers? Was it Israel or Galilee or Samaria? Or was it Judah? Who really took away the keys to Yahuwah's covenant calendar? I bet you can answer the question. We'll do more next week. Or not next week, next month. So what's next? To find out who's guilty and what happened to Yahuwah's covenant calendar keys, I'd just like you to plan to enjoy part 7 with us. It's called The Moon, Oh the Moon. We're going to do that, plan to do that October 19th, and I have titled it, My People Have Forsaken Me for the Moon. And that's the end of this presentation, but it's not the end of the study. So everyone, if you have questions or comments, you can email us at info@t4study.com, or you can visit the website, share with your friends. Thank you, and that's it. That's all she wrote.
Thank you very much. That was marvelous. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Wow.
Yes.
Before we go into questions, I just want to say a couple of comments, and then I have a question. And one of the comments is, thank you, Tim and Charlene, for providing us with some pretty in-depth teaching here. That was great. Also, I want to thank Vivian for stepping up to the plate and doing a wonderful job with those questions, better than I would have done. Thank you. And I also want to thank France for doing a really great introduction trailer there. I think that was fabulous. I wouldn't mind, posting that trailer in other places as well. I thought that was fabulous. My thing that I wanted to throw out there is I was noticing throughout all of these, and so I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not saying it is or isn't or anything like that. I'm throwing this out there. Could there be a combination of words that could be a clue to the wrong translation? And what I mean by that is the word new moon instead of the moon. Because when we see the moon, it's usually talking about the moon, right? But almost every time the word new is added to it, it's Kodesh translated as moon. Could that word new be a clue that it's Kodesh, not moon? Just thought I'd throw that out there. So, I don't know if anybody else noticed that. It was, if I'm on, some cloud or something. So I thought I'd put it out there.
Well, that's interesting, Mario, because in those bundles, it always has new. It never says just moon. It always has new in those bundles. And I know that when we first learned about the feasts, we were always taught new moon. Now, some of them say it's crescent, some say it's conjunct.